That's fine. I'm fine.
Oh, yeah.
I'll inside it.
Oh my God, it's so beautiful out there. Oh, it's crisp, feels like the fall, you know. Well, it's gonna get hot.
Where are you going to Montana?
Okay, well, that's coming back.
For about 3 years.
At least.
Hey,
You know, students have a way of.
there's a limited impact on US Mag. I've been staying out of trouble. But I'm just getting rolling again for trouble.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, we've got stuff to do.
Sorry.
How's it going? Good.
It looked like somebody sprayed it for me. I have some great neighbors up there, so.
That's great.
I didn't have anything to dig it out or recognize stuff.
What about your jacket? How far? Good, how are you?
Neighbors were around us, they could borrow a shovel.
For a while, I had I wasn't expecting it tomorrow. So, I mean, you thought something about
Hi, good to see you. Hi, Steve. I just want to let you know I was just in the peanut gallery back here.
Okay. See ya. Take good notes.
Yeah. Just hoping to absorb.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to see you. Hello.
I guess we could tell the Dominion that we settled the rate case.
I'll show you. I hope I brought them.
Okay.
That's your son.
So Austin's here.
How are you now?
There you are, okay.
I'm here.
Okay, I didn't
Just good
see
to
you.
see you.
I couldn't see you, even though you're right next to me, okay.
Yeah, let me.
Oh, excuse me.
Sorry, Doug. I spaced that.
Oh, that's nice. I know her. She's really nice, and I've just forgotten her name.
How are you doing? Very good.
But I will remember it very soon.
Good.
It's a really nice laid back place. Sioux Falls.
A little bit. A little bit.
I don't know if the projector's on.
We have to leave her because you know, anything. I'm such a wuss. Such a wuss.
What do you need?
Just light flash.
Oh.
Just the projector on.
It's just thinking.
My slides will be better if the projector's on.
Maybe not for
There's a
some.
Worked hard on them, you're gonna look at them.
Mom from Laurel. Can't see the, you have to
I
do
know Howard Lubo wanted the slides, so I'm gonna send them to Doug real quick. Are there any consultants that, do you want me to send them to you, or do you want me to send them straight to Howard?
Straight to Howard's.
This hotspot thing will work.
What we got?
I can go do it if you need.
Hi, this is Howard Lubo, and I'm on the call.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, Howard, we're just waiting here for a second, so we'll get started in a minute or two.
You get his.
Okay.
Yeah, I have his.
Hi, if you have slides, could you send them to Nick Nosita also? Thank you.
Hey Austin, are these slides the same as the ones that are on the commission website?
Yeah, if they've already been posted, then they are on the commission's website. Send them.
For folks on the phone, the slides are available on the Utah Public Service Commission's website under this docket link.
Just switch to green, Fred.
Yeah, just turn green.
Remember the days when only Kelly was tall enough to turn it on?
I do.
Remember the days when Barry would climb on the table?
I did that once too. Fred. Well, it's supposed, or even
Make sure it's still coming, huh? I'm such a mess. Oh, it's a teeth clean.
Dominion Energy, are we ready to get started?
Yeah, we start.
I have to, otherwise I sit like this. Oh, I fell off the horse. I broke a bone. That's okay. It's okay.
All right, why don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you, everyone. My name is Eric Martinson with the Public Service Commission. This is the time and place noticed under docket number 19-057-02. This is Dominion Energy Utah, application of Dominion Energy Utah to increase distribution rates and charges and make tariff modifications. This is phase 2 technical conference notice under the docket. Why don't we start with introductions of the attendees. We'll start with Mr. Ward, to my right.
Thank you. I'm Eric Orton with the Division of Public Utilities.
Doug Wheelwright with the division.
Philip Russell with Utah Association of Energy Users.
Carol Revelt, Public Service Commission.
Steve Beacon representing American Natural Gas Council.
Brenda Salter with the division.
Shauna Bevanus-Bringer with the division.
Gary Smith with the division.
Abdulhassan Abdullah with the division.
Jessica Ibsen with Dominion Energy Utah.
I'm Dave Lambert with Dominion Energy.
Austin Summers with Dominion Energy.
Public Service Commission.
David Williams with the division.
Dave Clark with the commission. Artie Powell with the division.
Joseph Holland with the commission.
I'm Roger Swenson. I'm a consultant for U.S. Magnesium.
Bob Davis with the division.
Tricia Schmid with the AG's office for the division.
Jennifer Clark on council for Dominion Energy.
Robert Moore of the AG's office representing the Office of Consumer Services.
Allison Anderson with the office.
Justin Jenner with the AG's office representing the division.
Justin Christensen, division.
Jeff Einfeld with the division.
Madison Galt with the division.
Great. For those on the phone, I heard there was Howard Lubo. You're still with us, Mr. Lubo?
I am.
Great. And I also heard from Nick Nocita.
That's correct.
Is there anyone else joining us over the phone?
Yes.
Proceed.
Yes.
Bruce Wrigley, Summit Energy.
Consultant for American Natural Gas Council.
Who was that? Sorry?
Tim Oliver, consultant for American Natural Gas Council.
Tim Oliver and Bruce Oliver?
And
Right.
Bruce Rigby also said something.
And Jim Daniel with OCS.
Damon Xenopoulos for Nucor Steel, Utah.
Great. I believe that's everyone checked off on my details. I've got a sign-in sheet. If attendees currently here wouldn't mind jotting down your details, and we'll go ahead and turn the time over to Dominion Energy.
That's me. So thanks everybody for coming, and thanks for your questions. I think we've got 17 slides. I don't know that it'll take a whole long time, but if there's questions, we're happy to go over those. So the first question that we had was give us an overview of the cost of service and rate design. And so I'll point out, I think as Kelly did, that there's a fine overview written in my testimony of our cost of service and rate design. So if it's there, but I'll go through a few things I think stand out to me, some things that are important. So as far as cost of service goes, we have used the same studies that we've used in the past. Two cases. One of those was settled. The rate case in 2013 was settled. The 2016 case was pulled down because of the merger. Before that, 2009, 2007, as far as I'm aware, things are pretty similar except for one difference that we'll go over later, and it was just that allocation to interruptible cells with some peak costs. So I'll go over that one later, but otherwise we've got the same allocators. The most important ones are the distribution plant that makes up the main services, meters and regulators. It's we have that whole distribution plant factor study that we've filed, and that's a big one. Design day in the past was called peak day. It's the same thing. And then throughput, a lot of costs are allocated on throughput. When we're talking cost of service, the main thing that we're looking at is trying to eliminate or reduce interclass subsidies. So we want to make sure that the GS customers are paying for the cost in the GS class, FS customers are paying for their costs, TS customers are paying for their costs, and so on. So that's kind of our big goal. Thanks to Jessica for going through all the minute details and putting these charts together. I thought it'd be good just to show kind of which allocators are used for what. So these are the allocators that are used for expense. So you've got two pieces. You've got the expense, and then you've got the rate base. And so the biggest ones are plant. So gross plant and distribution gross plant. When we're talking about gross plant, there is some distribution built in there, but a lot of it, I mean, if you look at the utility, it's a utility that's based on assets, right? You've got pipe in the ground, you've got trucks, all of those things. So since that's the big part of the business, that's how most of the costs are allocated. When you're looking at it on a rate base side, that big blue one there is the 60% design day, 40% throughput. So we're looking at it and saying some assets are used both to meet peak events or peak supply, or when it gets cold, and then some of that asset is used for just average daily throughput that you've got to go through the pipe. So when we're looking at things like feeder lines, M&R stations, compressor stations, things like that, those are all through that 60% design, 40% throughput. These others are, so when I'm looking at service lines, small diameter mains, and meters and regulators, that's all the distribution plant factor study. So that's why that one is a big, important one. Throughput.
Carol's got a question.
Oh,
But
yeah.
just one question. I'm a little bit confused on these charts. Is it, you're saying of the, all of the rate base, like say you have $1 million, that blue portion is the percentage of the amount of dollars that are allocated with those?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, I should clarify that. So this is the dollars that are allocated. It's not like the quantity of FERC accounts that are allocated. This is dollars that are allocated through those specific allocation factors. Good question. Sorry, something else?
Just really, just to make sure I understand, when you're saying allocation rate base, it's mostly the depreciation expense, is that?
No, so when I'm looking at something like, let's say there's a piece of main in the ground, and so that main is probably used to serve, a lot of different customers in different classes. So I'm trying to decide for the return that I'm going to get on that investment, how am I going to allocate the cost of that return to the different customer classes? So I'm saying I might, I've done a special study for service lines, I've done one for mains. So it's the return on the asset that's in the ground that'll eventually be allocated to, it'll be turned into rates. Okay, rate design. With rate design, this is the fun one in this case. We have some objectives. So when we're sitting down to make rates, particularly in this docket, in this instance, the things that were on our minds we want this to be principle based. We want it to be something that we can defend. We want to make sure that customers, in fact, removing intra-class subsidies was a big thing that was on our mind. If we can make sure that big customers aren't subsidizing little customers aren't subsidizing, big customers in some classes. That was kind of our big goal. But as we're doing that, we wanted to make sure that we maintained a level of consistency. So from class to class, I know we've had a lot of people moving from sales classes to transportation lately. We want to make sure that if you are a GS customer and you're moving to TS, that you're paying a similar distribution cost. We think that would be something that would be important. You're using the same assets, you're using the same, the same system, we think that the cost should be somewhat similar. We also, when I'm saying from rate case to rate case, one of the things that came up as we were doing some of our rate design was we could make some pretty significant changes to a rate, but then there's consequences to that. And so if I make big changes to a rate right now and then everybody leaves that rate because of that change, then the people that are left will probably be paying, they'll want a similar rate to what's there now. So I don't want to make big changes now and then have to come back and undo those changes 3 years from now. So that's what I mean, consistent from rate case to rate case. And then we wanted to remove D&G incentives to switch classes. And that was kind of a big goal. I'll point out that there's still a commodity incentive that customers would see, and that's decreasing over time. If you're familiar, I think most of you are, with Wexpro, their costs, when the market tanked back in 2008 for market supply gas, Wexpro is a cost of service provider, and so their prices have been higher than the market for the last decade, going on more than that. Wexpro's prices are coming down. They've been consistently coming down over the last few years, and so there is still an incentive for people to go transportation because they're not paying for Wexpro gas, but that incentive is decreasing over time. So I know, well, let's go over this before I tell you what I know. We've shown this timeline in, I think it was the IRP tech conference, but just as a reminder of how the TS class got to where it is, and this is somewhat, give us an overview and somewhat answering other division questions, but the class as we know it was first brought up in 2007 rate case, and then as we know it today was right around 2010. Just took, I think, time to get things worked out there. In 2013, we realized that the class was not paying its full cost. So we came in and we proposed that they pay full cost, but at the time, that rate case, we settled at 72% cost of service. If you remember, there was a two-step approach. So right when the rates became effective, it was 60%, and then later on, it took a step towards 72%. Also in that case, an important thing is that we settled the peak and throughput allocation factor. We have always filed that at 60-40, so 60% weighted on the design day and then 40% weighted on throughput. In that case, we settled that at 67-33. What that does is it puts more cost on customers that are dependent for heat, like residential customers. So that one put a little bit more on residential customers and took cost out of industrial customers. We also made some changes to the TS block breaks at that time so that they were more consistent with what an FS customer would see. We were seeing some growth starting to happen in that, and so that was a step that was made then. Then the 2016 rate case came along. So if you remember, we settled this at 72% cost of service. At the time we filed the 2016 rate case, it had slid to 53%. So there wasn't enough movement. People still were going to that class, and it was causing the subsidy to get worse. So we did propose full cost of service in that rate. We proposed these fancy optimized rates and blocks, and then no one looked at them because the rate case got pulled down. Fast forward a few years, and we're filing this case. So the TS class, as far as paying their full cost, slid further. So now it's at 40% of full cost at the time that we filed. And we're again proposing that all classes be moved to full cost. Now going into kind of what I know is a lot of this, because I've been promising these fancy optimized rates and everything for all these years, and ask my coworkers, it gutted me in June to just say, okay, we're not doing them. It's not going to work. There were some late nights, people talking me down. But what has happened is we've just had such significant customer growth over that period of time that the class just, there's a lot of variance between the customers in the class, and I'll go over that a little bit more. That's a funny picture. It felt like a train wreck when we were looking at this. Kelly's the calm one over there. But we had high growth in the TS class, and what's happened there is you're getting customers moving to that class, they're getting the volume discount without using the volume to justify the discount. I'm not ready to say that I'm throwing in the towel on these optimized rates because there's still value. We've used them in the GS class, but what we've kind of determined is that it needs to be from a more homogeneous group of customers that you can lump in there. So while I thought that we could do things through declining blocks, it's just not working that way right now. So I'm going to talk options in a minute, but for you to understand one of the options, one of the questions, GPU number 3, wanted to know kind of comparison between TS rates at optimal, what did we propose, and so I want to walk you through this, because if you remember from past presentations, this red curve, this red line is the cost curve, the green line is the revenue curve. And this is what we calculated in early June, and I was like, nailed it. It looks awesome, because it's a really tight fit. Everything was great. And then we started looking at this, and I'm going, that's kind of high, because what a lot of this, and we've got a lot of data requests right now saying, tell us what analyses you did to determine that this was not usable, and I'm going, I just looked at that. And then I went, I don't know if that's going to fly, because in the GS class, I'll show you their rates here in a minute, but their rates are, let's say we proposed 290, it might be in the 3s, but that's for 30 decatherms. And so if you're a customer in this TS class, my whole consistency argument just took a nosedive, because you're paying $2.48 for 200 blocks. So what we did, these are the existing rates. You can see that they would have gone from 74 cents using the 200 decatherm block to $2.48 with a 400 decatherm block. So you're staying in that first block for twice as long, and the rates are going up almost 4 times. So that was one of my analyses. I didn't bother getting a spreadsheet out to do it, because it was one of those I've got a problem kind of things. So these are the existing rates. What we decided to do is to stick with the existing block structure. So we're keeping the blocks at 200 decatherms, and we're just bringing the whole class up. So that was, as I'm going into things, that's where we landed. But let me walk you through a couple of options that we at least discussed, and some of them are still going on right now. Step 1 for the TS class has to be full cost. We can't do anything else unless we know where these customers really, that class is paying their fair share. Step 2 would be to either split the class or optimize rates in the next rate case, and that's what I've proposed in my testimony. Bring the whole class to full cost, let things settle out a little bit. I would think that just bringing everything to full cost might bring some customers to other classes, maybe to cells. It will also put some of the TBF customers back into TBF rather than the TES class. And so bringing everybody to full cost had to be step number 1. The benefit here, this gives us some time to let customers figure things out. Also gives time for the WACOG prices to get closer to the market, so there's not that incentive. And it allows some time for everybody, really, to research what the best option is for rate design going forward. Do we have a small transportation class? Do we have figure out a cost curve scenario once customers are in different places? It gives us a little bit of time to work on that. Another option would be to use the optimized rate designs that I showed you on the prior slide and just say, that's what it shows, let's do it. We think that what that would do is it would cause a mass migration back to the TS class. And not from TS back to cells. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Phil. Yeah, something didn't sit right there. That's a good catch. The problem with a mass migration back to cells is that it will happen after a rate case. So I get my rates set. I know what my GS customers need to be paying so that I can cover the cost to serve those customers. And then if I have this big influx of customers, that CET rate is no longer going to collect enough revenue. So that's one of the downsides from that.
Austin, do you have an idea how much that is?
As far as revenue?
Yeah.
I don't off the top of my head. I think that there would be some customers still would stay, depending on size. But I don't have it off the top of my head. But I think it would be significant.
It would be in the millions.
Yeah, it'd be a lot of money if they all just came back. And then finally, just this last bullet, drastic changes to the blocks might have to be changed back in the next case. So if I change the rates now, and I do these new blocks, everything, if I do, and then everybody leaves, next rate case in 2022, I'm going to be left with the customers that probably should have been there in the first place. I have to change everything back to where it is. Not the end of the world, but it's far from consistent. The other option is to split the class now, and we're studying that. We have a data request from the UAE that we'll have to them tomorrow to split the class, what the cost of service would look like if we split the class at 35,000 decatherms. And I know where they got that number from. It's that green box. The other data request the division asked is to have us split it at 120,000 decatherms. And where that number comes from is, as we were answering one of the data requests, I want to say DEU 115 of how many hundreds we've got. I'm in data request mode still. So DEU 1.15 asked us why we don't split it, bigger. And so we went back and we were looking at some of the historical tariff sheets. And there was, before you had the TS class, you had two different transportation rates. One was firm, one was interruptible. And so those were both tied into the TS rate. So this one was, the interruptible one was IT, and the firm one was FT2 was the rate that those customers were on. The FT2 rate used to have a minimum bill on it. And so we went back and we said, okay, this minimum bill, it was $20,000 some odd dollars at the time, kind of backwards engineered that and came up with that was based on 120,000 decatherms. So to be a firm transportation customer, you had to have a minimum use of 120,000 decatherms. Well, obviously this puts into our brains, why isn't it there anymore? So we kind of dug through testimony from the 07 rate case, because that's when this all was happening. And there was no mention of why that qualification or why that minimum bill was taken off. We don't know if it just happened and nobody caught it, or if there was a reason and nobody explained it. But the division has asked us to put together cost of service to see what that would look like at 120,000 decatherms. So both of those will be going out tomorrow.
When you did your optimal rates, remind me, if not, I'll ask you where. But in doing that, you did a cluster analysis, right, to determine where those breaks were at? Is that correct?
We had done a cluster analysis back as part of the 2016 case, was it, Dave? That we first did that cluster analysis? And the cluster analysis was showing, was it 28,000? It was right in that 30,000 vicinity.
So it's close to what UAE has asked for, the 35,000.
Right. And the 35,000 decatherm minimum that I proposed in my testimony, the purpose of that is to stop that growth that was happening. Well, I'd have to go too far back, but you remember we're adding all of those customers and the subsidies are getting worse and worse and worse. And so by putting that 35,000 decatherm floor in, the hope is that that stops, we can let things settle down, and then we can figure out.
Well, does that cluster analysis show more than one break? Kind of, for lack of a better word, natural break in the groupings?
We can go back and pull that, but my memory says that there was not a really good solid break anywhere.
Okay. Another thing that we thought of, and I don't think we've asked, is what if you did set up a stratified sampling experiment? So that would tell you where to break into groups to get a homogeneous variance.
Sampling by.
What's that?
Sampling
You're
by.
setting. You're not actually doing sampling. But you're setting up the experiment so that you get like groupings of customers.
Are you talking about load factor or usage or?
Usage, maybe even both. I don't know. It was just an idea that we potentially had that might be beneficial in terms of looking at how you would split that TS class out.
Yeah, let's talk. We
want
to figure this out.
Or you want Dave and I to talk?
Yeah, preferably you and Dave. Last time I was in a room with the two of you, it didn't go well for me.
The other thing, just I guess, a comment on that last bullet on the left, allow time to research best option. We've been researching this since, what, 2000?
Mm-hmm.
And we still have never come up with a clear.
Yep, I
answer.
agree.
I don't know if more
But one thing that we've
time is
never
really
done,
gonna help.
one thing we've never had though is step one. We've never had full cost rates in that class. And so we have full cost rates and things settle down. I would agree. I would love to put this to bed. Nothing would make me happy.
Okay.
Rate cases for me would be just a walk in the park if we had this solved. Now, we did propose in testimony what step 2 would look like, and I think I really do believe that that's a good option. But for it to happen, we have to get full cost, and I think we've got to stop the mass exodus into that class. Okay, so I might be out of my summary phase now and answering some questions. One of the questions asked about a comparison of the GS class if we did the optimal design. So this cost curve here on the left and these rates down underneath it are what the current structure would give us. So you can see the cost curve's coming down, the revenue curve isn't quite right. You've got some subsidies happening here, so these customers that are larger users are subsidizing the smaller users. That's what rates would look like under that proposal. Under 30 decatherms, you can see we tightened it up a little bit by changing it to 30 decatherm block break instead of 45. And your rates obviously go up a little bit, and your block differential increases. That means that the customers are paying less as they use more gas. And then finally, they wanted to see the optimal 8 decatherm block brake we came up with. And you can see that one is very tight. And the block differential gets even greater. So now you're reducing those interclass subsidies as much as you can for that customer makeup. And your rates for that first block go up to $3.66. So
We've talked about, in past cases, trying to split the GS class. Has the company done any analysis on it? Other than using tax codes that didn't go over very well a couple of years ago?
And I think I came into the department at the tail end of that. So since I've been in here, we've always just done residential, well, just one GS class. But I think it's not a bad way to go. And the reason I say that.
What's not a bad way to go? Just one class?
One class is because they are a homogeneous group, except for on usage. One uses more, but if you have a declining block, you're making sure that everybody's covering their costs, and if we can get closer to that optimal, then I think we're in good shape. One experience that I've had, and it kind of portrayed itself in this case a little bit, but in Wyoming, when we were filing a general rate case, we sat there looking at what happened to the FS class. I think, how many customers do we have in that class? Do you know, Dave?
The FS class?
FS in Wyoming?
Just shy of, in Wyoming?
Yeah.
25.
25 customers. That's what I mean, it's small. And I'm looking at these rates going, why are these going up so much? It just doesn't make sense before we filed. And as we chased it down, one customer had left, and it was the biggest FS customer. And just because that one customer left, it left the remaining customers with a lot of costs to cover. And so there's benefits to having, a larger group in there. Now with Utah, it probably isn't as critical, but the IS class this time did not have we're down to 20 IS customers. And so you're looking at what happened to their rates, and I think it shows a little bit of a decrease. And it's just because the whole makeup of the class has changed over the last 6 years. We are open to it. I will say, and you can ask the UAE in the office or the division, some of these scenarios, it takes redoing the entire cost of service, and it takes time. We would just ask that you be judicial about about those requests, because they take a lot of work. DPU questions 4 and 5. So DPU 4 was asking about this whole idea of assigning costs or not assigning costs to the IS class for those design day costs. So what we did is we went through the design day allocator and added volumes for the IS class, and then ran that through the rate model, and we came up with these proposed, these are the rates that we proposed in this proposed column. These are the rates that you'd come up with for the IS class if you allocate design day to them. And so you come up with a $65,000 increase to that class. And so I think the question asked, what do you consider excessive? And so in my mind, I think anything more than what they're going to be using would be excessive. So $65,000 is excessive. That's my answer. The logic that we have on that is that in an actual peak event, those customers would be curtailed, and so they wouldn't be paying for those peak costs. And I know there's other arguments out there that go the other way. So that answers that one. There was also a question about curtailment during OFOs. So this is I talked with Will Schwarzenbach and Abby Thomas about this and said, how do you guys want to go about answering this? Because we have changed our tariff, section 5, in was that last year? I don't even remember anymore. but we changed everything so that these operational flow orders were more specific to the customers that were getting these OFOs. So the purpose now of an OFO is to match your usage to the gas that you've nominated that's been approved for you that day. So if there are days when a customer might go over by a little bit, and that's okay, that doesn't matter. But if they issue an OFO, they're saying, okay, you had 100 decatherms show up, you need to match your usage to that 100 decatherms. You can't go over that. So we haven't had, since we changed that tariff, we haven't really had any whole burn to scheduled quantities. We haven't had interruptions since that. Talking with Will, said, all right, cut to the chase, what do they need to know? Do you think that things will work better now? And he said, absolutely, because now if I'm sending an interruption, it's only going to be on that interruptible piece. It's not going to be on, what's that, back in 2012, where even firm customers were getting interrupted. So if we need to have more conversation on that one, but I think that the tariff changes have really kind of fixed that. And then there was a question about ANG costs in the plant factor study. So in my testimony, I actually say that there are some costs that are allocated using the plant factor study, but there are no ANG costs in the study itself. So if you remember those charts from early on, a lot of stuff is allocated through plan. So it's just bound to happen.
So before we leave that slide, remind me what case it was that we made an adjustment to the design day. I can't remember. It was just a recent case.
To allocating it to the IS
No, the actual design day itself. You proposed something in a case, and
was that the peak hour where we proposed peak hour?
The peak hour contract where we came back and said, and that adjustment was used in the recent IRP.
It was. And
so we really haven't seen an effect on anybody's behavior yet due to that change. I mean, it was a fairly small change. It wasn't huge.
And the only, I don't know, I wouldn't expect customer behavior to change based on that. I would.
Well, maybe not their behavior, but I guess what I'm trying to explore without being argumentative is whether or not we might see more interruptions in the future if we redesign or change that peak day definition. In other words, right now, we haven't seen a peak day by definition. We haven't met that peak day, or we haven't met the definition of that peak day for what, 30, 40, 50 years? I can't remember now.
Yeah, it was
1990, I think it was.
Yeah.
And so, might we see more interruptions if the peak day, without being pejorative, more a reasonable definition? In other words, what is the non-interruption that we've seen over the years due to the fact that we've got such a generous peak day forecast, and so we have resources that allow them not to be interrupted. I don't know. I'm just I'm thinking off the top of my head and probably getting into.
Might be a good question for Will and Mike Platt, but
just to think about that a little bit though. I mean, are interruptions a function of the peak day definition or a function of the existing system? That the actual.
Well, that's kind of I'm
there.
asking. I think we're asking something very similar, if not the same thing. Because I'm asking if the current system is a result of our use of a peak day definition.
Okay, so
that we haven't seen very well.
Yeah.
Is the system overbuilt? Is that what you're asking?
That might be one way to say it.
And that's a fun one to say, unless you're the one that's trying to
No,
get
I'm just
gas.
saying.
As long as the engineers aren't here,
Yeah.
who cares?
Yeah, I won't quote any past technical conferences or stare anybody down or anything, but yeah, I mean, I don't know that has any bearing on the way that we're assigning our peak, because all that we're doing is we're just saying, you know, regardless of how the system was built, I'm just trying to say, okay, of those costs, how am I going to allocate those to the?
You're just saying that there's a principle here that
Yeah.
that you believe is
Yeah.
correct, that since these are interruptible customers, they shouldn't be allocated those peak
Those
costs.
peak costs. Yep. That's what I'm saying. Thanks for wording that for me so well.
And if you look at the load profile, I mean, there aren't very many of these customers left.
Yeah.
But if you look at the load profile, most of them are heavy summer users and use almost nothing in the winter. So it's actually,
It's a good point.
it's a decent methodology.
We're down to 20 customers on that
To
class.
put it in perspective, I think on the day of, the highest send-out day in 2018, I think that was actually on New Year's Eve, the interruptible sales customers for the day were just over 1,000 debit things.
So another way of looking at it is that's $65,000 is primarily being picked up by the GS class.
And it's being spread fairly among all
a
of the
million
classes.
customers.
Yeah, the GS class will get the share, the lion's share of that $65,000, but that's where the lion's share of the customers are at. And they're the ones that are using heat on those cold days. Commission asked an interesting question about the distribution plant factor study and whether it uses, if it accommodates or accounts for the differences between multi-dwelling and single-dwelling homes. So as it was filed, no, it does not account for that. We did run a new distribution plant factor study, same samples, same everything, but we broke out what was multi-unit dwellings and what was single-unit dwellings. So you had 685 of the total of the sample were multi-dwellings, the rest were single. Service line cost was a little bit less, and I've got two numbers here for average service line, because in the distribution plant factor study, it assumes, if it samples a meter, it's going to assume that that service line is for that customer. And so if you do it that way, you're coming up with a little bit shorter service lines is what you've got. But then we also thought, well, if it's a multi-unit dwelling, there might be more than one meter on that service line. And so should you share the cost of that service line among all of the meters that are on that, that are attached to it? But if you calculate it that way, you come in with a less expensive cost per service line of about $500. Just for information, there was about an average of about 8 meters per service line on those. Average main line was also a little bit less expensive. Average meter went up a little bit, and we looked at that. Some of the meters aren't just standard residential meters. They're meant to accommodate multiple units, and so they're if those were in the sample, then they came in a little bit more expensive.
I have a question about that also. It seems like in the past it was more, not the distant past, recent past, it was more simple, because you would go to a neighborhood, like your exhibit shows, find out how many homes, 1,000 feet, that sort of stuff. And that seems to be the same result if you go in the outlying areas of Salt Lake. But recently there have been numerous, maybe dozens of 5 or 6 story multi-units.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question is it reasonable to differentiate the areas for this plant factor study downtown area versus a urban area?
I don't know if you want to do it by area, but I think what you could do by doing this, there's still a lot of work to be done on it, but you could make a rate that was for multi-unit dwellings and one that was for, single residential customers. There'll be another way of breaking out the GS class a little bit further.
I was just thinking.
But right now, we do it the way that we've done it because you've got everybody in one. So you're doing rate making by averaging, just average rate making, which is that's done all the time. I mean,
it just seems to be, if you go outside of town a little bit, I don't know what the number is, 20 people within a block. And if you go here, you would have 200 people in the block, or 600, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe they don't have the same cost to serve them.
Right, and right now I think we are accounting for that in the distribution plan factor study. They're just all lumped in though. So it's just, we do divide like the main line per customer. So if they've got 1,000 feet, if we're measuring 1,000 feet and there's 5 meters along that 1,000 feet, then we're going to assign, we're going to divide the total main cost by those 5 customers. And we'll use that to calculate the average cost. If you've got 1,000 feet and you pass 500 meters along that way, then we're going to divide that main cost by that 500.
That was by sampling, wasn't it?
Well, if we get a sample of customers to test, right? So if your house comes up in the sample, we'll, that's what we should do, that'd be fun next time. We'll measure out to 1,000 feet, and if you're just in a standard neighborhood, a normal single dwelling neighborhood, then you'll pass 25 other meters in that. So we would divide the cost for your meter, or for your service line, we divide the cost of your main by those 25, and that's the cost that your meter would get.
Right, and that's what I was kind of going with that, is where you're doing that sample. If you're doing it in my neighborhood, there may be 20.
It's
If you're doing it
all
in
over the
town,
system.
It'll be hundreds.
It's all over the system. It's just a
So you've done
random.
several?
It's a random sample. We've got 5,000.
5,000 samples.
We've got 5,000
meters.
meters that we've sampled.
It's based off the full meter population throughout all of our service territory, Utah.
So X% of them are people who live in multi-family dwellings.
Right.
And when you're doing that, are you assigning costs to the main line based on a record of that actual installation cost at that location?
What we do is we would use the average. So if I come out from your house and you've got 2-inch main, and that's what I'm going to that's what I'm trying to figure the cost on. I'm going to go back to 2018 and see what it actually cost us to install 2-inch main, and that's the cost that I'm going to use for that. So and that's the cost that we use for the whole system anywhere there's 2-inch. Same thing goes with service lines. If you have a 1/2-inch service line, we have a cost for that.
But I would imagine a 2-inch service line per foot installation at Sugar House is substantially more expensive than in Manti.
Not anymore.
Not really.
Because of all the difficulties in it setting.
Yeah, and you'll get a little bit different from city to city, but again, this is one of those times when average rate making is just
easier.
It has to happen that way.
How are you defining multiple dwelling? Is it 2 or more, or is it 10 or more? Do you know?
Well, we pull the data from the customer information, the billing system database, and they flag every premise that we serve is flagged as either a single dwelling or a multi-dwelling, mobile home, or in some cases a master metered premise. So multi-dwelling, I think, is pretty broad. I mean, it can be a duplex or a large apartment complex.
Or you could have a duplex that's actually listed as a single.
Yeah.
I mean,
That could
So
be,
it's a-
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
it could just depend on who is setting up. But generally,
Okay.
if there's more than one, if there's more than one
Yeah.
unit when they're setting up the account, they'll flag it as well.
Is that the same for a lot of those units would have a meter for the common areas? That's included in multi-unit?
So common area, like a meter for a
For a central water
swimming
heater or
pool or.
something. Yeah.
You know, I guess I'd have to sample a few and see how it's flagged. My assumption is it would, because it's still part of a multi-unit complex, it would be flagged as multi-unit, but maybe not if it's just a single building, like a guest house or as you say, a common area, that might be flagged as single dwelling, because there's no shared living space in there. It may just vary. I guess I'd have to look a little deeper.
Just curious.
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Or depending on the size of the clubhouse, it could show up as a commercial meter, and then it wouldn't be residential at all.
Yeah.
Just, there's,
Well, even on the commercial side, we'll still flag them as single dwelling, multi-dwelling. I guess strip mall versus just a standalone structure that's a commercial entity business, a bakery on the corner versus City Creek.
okay. Anything else on this one? The OCS had 3 questions. Oh, was there one on the phone? I heard a voice. So the first question asked about any change to cost of service studies. So I think I've kind of covered that. The 2013 rate case, that was a settled case, didn't allocate any design day cost of the IS class. We can see what your direct testimony says on that one. The second one was determining gradualism adjustment. So when I would imagine what happened is somebody from the OCS was doing exactly what I want them to do and diving deep into the model. And they found this line that says gradualism adjustment, and they see some costs from the TBF class. So the TBF class is the Transportation Bypass Firm class. So these customers are not buying their gas from us, they are firm customers, but they are large enough and close enough to an intrastate, to another pipeline, that they could bypass us and just go and buy a tap, buy gas from whoever. But we want those customers on our system. That benefits everybody because now they're contributing to just the cost of running the utilities. On that line, there is a number of 50%, and that 50% is what we have just settled in the past. And I don't know of any numerical calculation to justify that 50%. I think it's just what it's always been, and it's what we've always used. So it should offer them enough incentive to not bypass our system. Although, like I showed you, the TS class right now is getting a 60% subsidy. So some of those TBF customers switched. I think I outlined that in the testimony. Their third question was about the allocation factor. So if I'm giving these customers, these TBF customers, a $2.5 million subsidy, who is it that's going to pay that? So the question is, why are you using the 60-40 split? And I had to think about that for a minute, but I think it does make sense to use that 60-40 split. A lot of the costs that are allocated using that 60-40 split are things like M&R stations, measurement and regulation stations, which a TBF customer would have to have. And then you've got a big fuel line, a big main line, might be even feeder line sized line that's going to them, which is also allocated using that 60-40 split. So I think there's logic for that 60-40 split, and that's why we're using that. That was all the OCS questions, and then we are into the ANGC questions. So the first question was about, do we compare our rates to the surrounding states? and that's a hard comparison to make, I think. And the reason why is that each state might have different, I don't know, they might have different objectives. If you were to look at the Utah rates right now, if you're in California and Nevada, and you look at Utah rates, you might look at them and say, those rates look great, but I know that those rates are under cost. And so when we are doing our rates, we are focusing on the cost of service study for our customers, and with what we know we have to focus on with just Utah regulation. Don't really focus much on the other states. I had a question about why do we only allow TS customers to contract on a yearly basis instead of just saying anytime during the year you can come on. That's really just a planning, that's because of planning. So when we're preparing our IRP, we start early on in the year, and we want to know how many customers we need to buy gas for. And so if we know by February 15th that they're coming and they sign everything by February 28th, that gives our gas supply group time to make the right purchase contracts, enter into those contracts, make some decisions. I think we need to talk about the 35,000 decatherm floor a little bit, and what it would mean. So the language that's in the tariff that we proposed says that customers must be taking service by July of 2020. These rates, though, the tariff sheet that we proposed would go into effect on March 1st of 2020. And so I think that the question that the ANGC asked is, I think they're getting at, when are you trying to cut? When are you trying to implement this 35,000 decatherm? And the answer to that is you'd have to be taking gas by July 1, meaning you'd have to be basically taking gas now to be class, or use over 35,000 decatherms. So we think that that would be a hard cutoff as of right now.
And the reason for that is because if we let one more year be open, there's going to be a massive push to get as many people onto the TS class, which is just going to increase the problems that we have. So we feel like it's an important step in mitigating the issues that we already have and allowing us to work through them.
Thank you.
Could you explain, you said it's effective now, I didn't quite get the.
So the way that the TS customers do this is if they want to come onto our system as a transportation customer, they need to notify us by February 15th that they want to, and then they have to sign the contract by, I think it says February 28th. But these rates go into effect. So these rates will go into effect on March 1, but then their contract doesn't start until July. So they're notifying us, and then they're waiting through March, April, May, and June before they actually become a customer in the TS class. So we're just
This is Bruce Oliver from ANGC, the consultant. I need a clarification on that. If a customer has to make a decision by March 1, are they supposed to make that decision based on your proposed rate, and then they're stuck with that decision even if the rates change?
That's a good question, and I think they'd have to make their decision based on the best information that they know at the time. By then we'll have had the hearings. I think everyone will kind of have an idea at least of where we think things will be going, but yeah,
And how will that idea be communicated to customers?
I am giving a presentation to the transportation customers on Tuesday. I will let them know.
But that will still face uncertainties. I'm just
Absolutely.
trying to understand how the customer deals with this.
Are you talking about an existing customer who?
No, I'm talking about a current GS customer who is considering transferring to TS service. They notify you before March 1st that they want to make that change based on either current rates or their perception of what they think will be in effect July 1, and then what's in effect July 1 is something different. How do they deal with that?
So I'm assuming you're talking about a customer using more than 35,000 decatherms, right? Because our proposal is that anyone
Well,
using...
that requirement isn't in place right now. You're saying that they should assume now that that requirement will be effective, even though it's just proposed right now.
Yeah, there's a timing challenge there for sure. I would agree with you.
Yeah.
I think you have to make a decision based on the best information that they know at the time.
How many new people have signed up February of this year that you know are going to be move to transportation?
So for 2019 growth?
Yeah.
So the customers who notified us in February and then became customers in July of this last year is right around 150.
A little less than that, 140, right in there.
So Austin, I want to clarify something. So currently, the way things work, and let's forget the rate case for a minute. A customer just has to notify the company of their intent to switch to transportation service by, what is it, mid-February? February 15th. But anytime, I believe, and Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, between February 15th and July 1, they can say, actually, I changed my mind and not sign the TS contract and stay GS. Is that correct?
That's correct. There are several steps along the way. The contract becomes effective July 1st. I think you have to have telemetry in place in May or June. There are lots of off-ramps, I would say, along the way. There aren't any more on-ramps. You have to give notice in February so we can do our planning. But you have up until it's time to sign the contract to change your mind. So we would recommend to those customers that if they want to give notice and then see how the rate case shakes out, they will still have time to take one of those off-ramps if they no longer qualify.
It's like signing a letter of intent and then in March or April deciding, oh, I changed my mind.
Yeah.
And by then, they would have certainty in the rates.
But that only considers the utility side of it. A customer considering transportation service also has to make a commitment to their supplier. If they make a commitment to their supplier when they give their letter of intent in February, they may not be able to back out of that.
Well, they would have to make it contingent on the final decision to actually become a TS customer. But there's a little bit of, maybe I misunderstood, Jim, because you're saying that they don't sign the contract until essentially just before.
Not essentially just before.
It depends on the customer, but I think legally they could wait till July 1.
So yeah, let me walk you through the dates that are in the tariff, and I'm in section 5.01, page 5-2. So they have to give notice in February. It does say a fully executed contract must be received by February 28th of the same year. No,
Say
you're right.
Say that again.
Fully executed contract by February 28th. So you're right.
So
there is
that's
a timing issue.
That's what I thought I
problem.
heard Austin say.
Yeah, there's a timing issue. Telemetry by mid-April. AC power installed by May 15th.
And how-
Access agreements for Quest languages, our nomination system by May 31st. And then,
And if you don't have that, what's
approved-
the, if you don't have those things, what's the consequence? The contract's terminated?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
are there any costs to the customer for termination of that contract?
No, there aren't. And then if approved, such a request will be effective by July 1st. And I think they would, I would argue that if the tariff no longer permits them into the class, then that contract would be disapproved. It's a form contract that they would sign.
Well, I think we're talking about more than just qualifying for the class. We're talking about customer giving notice in February and then this rate case is concluded and the customer deciding that it's uneconomic to go to TS. And now is that customer stuck with that contract? So there's there's off-ramps for the company in the contract, but are there off-ramps
Here's the
past the execution of the contract where the customer can
there are.
change their minds?
So
In the contract itself, not, well, maybe they're built into the tariff.
Contract refers to the tariff.
Okay.
And the tariff says that if you don't have telemetry by April 15th, you don't get to be in the class. And so there's an off-ramp, they just don't get the telemetry. If you don't have AC power installed by May 15th, you don't get to be in the class because we can't do measurement for you.
Well, we're talking about a timing issue though.
Yeah.
So if a customer says, okay, I'm gonna go TS, and yeah, I'm waiting for this rate case conclusion, but in the meantime, I'm hoping or I'm projecting that this is still gonna be good for me, and so I put in the new
telemetry.
meter.
So,
Thank
but-
you.
Yeah.
I mean, I realize that they're making investments. That's not my issue. My issue is, up until July 1st, do they have an opportunity to just say, hey, I've changed my mind. This is not going to work for us.
I think the way you would say that, and I don't think they do have all the way until July 1st, but I think the way that you would say that is to not make the investment. The very first deadline after the contract would be April 15th, and that's going to be a couple weeks after rates are effective. I mean, aren't we looking for
Well, 6 weeks after rates are.
6 weeks?
March
Yeah,
1st,
March
right?
1st. So by the time you have to have AC, or, by the time you have to have telemetry in, you know.
Isn't that April 15th, your meeting with a telemetry technician?
Customer must meet with the telemetry technician, yeah.
So,
I don't know why I'm bothering reading the tariff. You know it all by
it's
heart.
almost like I read it yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah, so by March 1st is before all of the off-ramps, and they can use any of those off-ramps. If they call us and say, we're not talking to your telemetry guys and we don't want to do it, they don't have to do it.
And Phil asked, there's no cost to the
No.
customer?
Not to us, no.
Well-
There's no penalty in the contract or anything like that.
Other
They
than
would-
potentially some investment that the customer may have made. There's no cost, there's no liquidated damages in the contract.
No.
That
This
the
is,
customer would have to.
these dates for us are only for planning purposes, so we make sure we buy the right supply.
And then on the other side of that, if a customer, this maybe just goes to the current language of the tariff, we may not want to open this can of worms, but if a customer does back out and take one of those off-ramps, you had mentioned that part of the reason that that the timing is what it is that the company needs to make planning decisions. You know, how do those two things intersect, right? I mean, you've got the company making planning decisions based off of commitments that are signed in February. You've got people, you know, changing their mind months later. I mean, how does that affect things?
Still a timing problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's a timing
It is,
problem.
but
Yeah,
I
I get
think
it.
we just have to deal with it.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's any remedy in the tariff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So whatever rates are approved would go into effect March 1.
Right.
Correct. So there would be an order presumably from the commission prior to that, so we have time to get rates in place. Is that right?
Just prior, probably.
I mean, so I'm presuming
further
that it's still be
clarification.
before February 28th.
Put in, right in the order. Go ahead, Bruce.
In your rate design, you've assumed a significant increase, I think about 150 customer increase in the TS class as of July 1. If your proposed rates are approved, would you redesign those charges based on a lesser number of customers for the TS class?
The answer is yes. So there's a disconnect, and that's on the next slide. But so the customer growth forecasts were based on the IRP, which we did, what was that, April? Something in there. That 35,000 decatherms was a mid-June kind of a decision. And so, yes, some customers were forecasted to grow in 2020, and the way that we forecasted that was just holding the 2019 growth flat. So just saying that same 140 customers, whatever it was, would happen again. Which was a decision.
Would you assume that all of them would go away, or how do you determine how many you'd have for rate design purposes?
Well, so for the 2020 forecast, we just used the 2019, what we had in 2019, and then added the 2019 growth to it.
Just for the TS customers?
Just for the TS class. Yeah. Because when we're doing the IRP, you know, and we're trying to get this rate case together, we were kind of torn, because do we add no customer growth in the TS class, even though for the last decade we've had growth in the TS customer class? Or do we put some growth there thinking that maybe things, we had to put something there, so we chose to just keep it flat with the 2019, the same 2019 growth.
Does that assumption in TS customer class growth correspond with a migration from some other class, from the GS class?
Yeah.
Okay.
It does, they pull from the GS and from the FS.
Marty?
When a customer leaves the GS class or any other class and goes over the TS class, they're taking with them costs. Under your cost of service study, they're taking costs with them. But you're also spreading those costs in the TS class over a larger number of customers. So do you have an idea of what the net effect of that is if, say, the 150 that you forecasted don't materialize? What's the net effect on the rates for the TS class? You see what I'm asking?
Yeah.
Have you looked at that?
No.
Okay.
But I would assume.
Be careful.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I guess I'm assuming in an ideal world, and that's a dangerous world to live in. But assuming they're taking the cost of them, hopefully that wouldn't change much in the TS class.
Well, you have a certain amount of TS customers that you're saying, okay, before the migration, we're allocating their full cost of service to. Now they're bringing their full, it's just not clear to me that it's a net increase or decrease in those rates. I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't either.
Because there's at least those two major moving pieces.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just using sort of a casual observation, right? You know, you had a slide that showed the history of things, and you know, there was at one time we had settled at 72% of cost, and pretty much the only thing that's changed since that time has been, not the only thing, but a major thing has changed has been an influx of new customers, and that share of cost has come, cost recovery has come down with that. So, it might actually be the case that, assuming another additional growth, in fact, might push unit costs higher in the class.
I don't know if I agree with that, because you're moving those two pieces. You're moving full cost over to a class. And now I want to know what the incremental impact is of another 150 moving or not moving.
Right.
So what's happened in the past, in some sense, is irrelevant. Because you're moving it to, that's the first step, is to move the class to its full cost of service. And then what's the net impact of customers migrating if they're also bringing their full cost of service with them? To me, it's not clear.
Yeah, it's theoretical, at this point.
Well, I'm going to defend Kevin here a little bit, because I think if the rate was originally designed for customers who are using on average 100,000 decatherms, and so it's based on a volume discount, so to speak, and you bring a whole group of customers in who are using considerably less than 1,000, but they're still getting the volume discount, then yeah, they're bringing their costs over, but the revenue break that they're getting on what they're paying is so great that they're not covering their costs, because they're being charged as if they used 100,000 decatherms, but they're only using 5,000. So there's no way you're going to be able to recover those costs from that customer with the volumes that they're using.
So you're saying that if the 150 don't materialize, the cost would actually be lower to the TS class. The rate would be lower. Or in other words, another way to look at it is, if that class was at full cost of service, moving another 150 would raise everybody's rates.
Moving 150
in?
Yes.
At full cost.
Because all the other customers would have to make up that. I mean, that's exactly what you were just saying.
Right.
Is you got that subsidy. Every time we add another 100, 200, 300, that subsidy gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
you're not adding customers who represent, say, the average profile.
Right.
You're adding customers.
Below
that are
average, right. If we're looking at it on an average basis, you're adding the below average customers. And
Okay.
by
That I
nature, when they come
agree
in,
with what you're
everyone else has to
saying.
cover that
Okay.
spread. But we can model it. I mean, I don't even think, we can talk about it theoretically, but I think we can model it, move them out and see what it does, right?
Depends on how deep you want to go. I mean, if you're talking like a whole new cost of service study for 130, 140 customers.
Well, or at least we
you
can
know.
take a swag. I mean, you know what the cost of 150 you could figure that out, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's
So maybe not
a lot of moving pieces,
detailed,
but
but
we
I
could-
think you can take a high level look and say,
this is what would happen.
this is, at least come up with some overall revenue and cost changes that either support what we're saying or don't.
Okay. Moving on. There was a question about designing a separate rate for customers less than 35,000 decatherms annually. I think I've spoken to that a little bit. We didn't obviously propose it. We anticipated using the declining blocks, and so that's what we were planning on. There are 2 outstanding data requests that are asking for cost of service at 35,000 and 120,000. We'll get those out.
So are you, sorry, I don't know if, Steve, if somebody, I'm not quite sure what the question is being asked here. Are you asking what if you did a separate rate design for these customers in the TS class? So for instance, on the electric side, we have Schedule 6, but we also have Schedule 6A and 6B, so there are actually 3 different rate designs for that class. Now, it's different than here because we're talking about volume size, but is that what you're asking, is what if you did a separate rate design for this group of customers within the TS class? Is that?
I think so. Bruce?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
So the question that was asked was, did you
What
consider?
you're saying, as we understand it, is that you have a class of TS customers, new TS customers. They're comparatively smaller in size, and you see that the current rate isn't designed for them. Well, what would a rate that is designed for them look like?
Okay.
And I don't have a rate design, so we don't have a structure for that scenario right now.
But our data request asks for, an analysis that would treat them as 2 different classes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, you're actually splitting the
right,
class.
right, at 35,000.
So to be clear,
But then you could design rates for both.
Whatever you want.
yeah. So we've done everything up through cost of service is what we've done. So we've got the cost. So if it's $15 million, then that's as far as we've taken it. But then rate design, we didn't do any of that.
If you were to keep it as one class but have different rate designs within the class, in some sense, would you have to run a cost of service just for that rate class? Because the first thing you have to do is allocate the total cost, right, and then you design the rate to recover whatever that bucket of cost is
Right.
to.
And
so
so
is that doable?
Well, so what we've done with
No, I'm not talking about what Kevin's asking. I'm saying that if you kept it all at one class, but you wanted a different rate design for this class, or for this one group of TS customers, does that necessitate running, say, for lack of a better term, a mini cost of service study just for that rate class?
Well, in fact, I think that's what Kevin's done. I mean, if you wanted to call them all TS, but then you've got a group that's under 35.
But you're doing that in the context, well, again, I'm trying to ask a question, and I may not put the question mark at the end. But you're doing Kevin's request in the context of a full cost of service study, is that correct?
Right. How else would you?
I don't know, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, I'm open to suggestions. I love
You're
to
the
hear.
expert, I'm just here to ask questions.
I've seen that. I would love some proposals.
We don't have to discuss it a lot. It's just something that came to my mind. How would you actually allocate the cost within the class to be able to come up with a separate rate design? If I'm correct, I don't think we do that on Rocky Mountain Power side.
From an implementation perspective, I'm not even sure how we would bill customers under two different rate structures within the same rate class.
Yeah, to me, that's just two different
Yeah,
rate
That may,
classes.
that may be, that, there may be no practical difference between having a separate rate versus just putting them in a separate class.
Yeah.
I realize that. I'm trying to explore the idea of keeping it all as one class.
We've been doing these cost of service studies for a long time. I think we have a lot of confidence in them. And so I think that's the way that we always look at if we're going to say who should be paying for a cost. We prefer to go through the cost of service studies, but if there's other.
But in concept, if you did identify a separate class and did a cost service study that allocate costs to that separate class of smaller TS customers, you'd account for things like differences in load factor between the smaller customers and the larger customers, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's 100 different ways to do rate design. That's the thing. So I think that we're providing data requests that give you the total cost. We haven't done any rate optimization or anything further than that. If any intervener wants to propose something, if you've got your direct coming up on something other than what we've done, like I say, I'm all ears. We're open. We do want to make this work. If a customer wants to be a transportation customer, then that's fine with me as long as they're paying their costs. Question 5, we're ready to move on to that one, was regarding if you're a customer that's under 35,000 decatherms and you're already paying an admin fee and you're already paying a basic service fee, what other costs do you think need to be or under collected from those customers? And again, we don't have a rate structure for those customers, right? So I don't know exactly how much that is, but if you look at the TS class on a whole, you can take the admin fee and the basic service fee with the rates that we've proposed would be designed to collect about $5.5 million, and the total cost assigned to the class is about 40.5. So there's still a lot of costs that need to be collected outside of the admin fee and the basic service fee.
I guess our perspective on that was a little different. In asking the question, what we were trying to get to is that your customer charges, your fixed fees or your basic service fees are designed to recover certain fixed costs up front. You have administrative fees for other customer-related elements of their service. What are the elements of the service and the cost of the service that you're under recovering from these larger customers? Not in terms of dollars, but in terms of categories of costs or cost by work account. Are these peak day costs? Are they throughput costs? What are you under recovering in, by type of cost?
Okay, so in the admin fee, I'm collecting the cost of the marketers. Well, not one of our account reps is the word that I'm looking for. I'm covering the cost of software that's used for nominations. I'm covering the cost of measurement technicians to go out there and change batteries and check on telemetry issues.
Right.
I'm collecting, what else is in there? Gas supply group, a little bit of their costs are in there. So and I know we've answered those in the data request. I don't remember who answered them or if it's even gone out yet, but I think it's actually one of the ANGC's data requests that we'll see tomorrow. We outline that. In the basic service fee, you've got costs associated with return on meter, service line and main. You've got billing, postage, those kinds of things in there. So
Yeah, but all of the
everything
basic
everything
service
else
fees-
besides that is what we would say we would be under collecting. It's running the rest of the utility. It's integrity management. It's
Operating and maintenance expenses.
yeah, O&M expenses. It's
Taxes.
a garage. It's everything else that's not in those two costs.
But no assessment as to whether that's throughput or peak related or other factor related costs.
Looking across the board.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand
Yeah.
what your question is, because if it's not,
We'll see your answers, and if we need to, we'll follow up. Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
Question 6 was, what did we use to analyze the changes? So I realized that there were big changes to the TS class. That flat increase, percentage increase, is it's not a small increase to those customers. I already talked to you earlier about the reasonableness check. Does it make sense? The other thing we've talked about is the cost of service studies. Those are definitely what we use to determine what cost should be paid by the customer. Whether it's a big increase, which I think needs to happen just to get things on the right path, or not. We'll also do some analysis, and you'll see these in data requests again, about the percentage change of a total bill. We would compare the rates to the TS customer would be paying to the rates that we pay as a GS customer. And again, that consistency were things that we were looking at. Again, the 35,000 decatherm floor came up. There isn't going to be like a minimum bill. We're not proposing a minimum bill to these customers. We're saying if you want to remain on the TS class, you need to be, I guess if you want to be a new customer in the TS class, you need to be using that 35,000 decatherms. But we're not saying that we're going to bill you everything up to 35,000 decatherms. We're just saying that's the floor, that's the requirement to be a customer. So it doesn't really cause any rate change to the TS class.
So that requirement will be assessed based upon historic use for a customer that's considering a change?
That's correct. Yeah, we'll just look at their.
Would that be the most recent 12 months or what period?
We will look at the most recent 12 months to see if they qualify.
Would you be able to assess for us how many customers that are not currently TS customers would fall into that category?
We'd be able to give you a quantity. We wouldn't be able to tell you who they are necessarily.
No, I wouldn't.
Is there any contemplation or thought in, say, a customer comes and says, hey, I'm thinking about being a TS customer. We have, say, 6,000 average decatherms. What was it, 35,000? Let's go a little bit higher. 25,000 decatherms. But we're thinking about increasing that by up to 50,000 or 40,000 decatherms. Yeah, and part of that expansion is the idea that we can do better on the TS class. That's part of our economic plan. Or is there any contemplation of allowing that type of scenario? In other words, what you're saying is when they come, they say they already have to meet the 35,000. yeah, go ahead and do it.
Well, I mean, I think we would do that all the time for a new customer, right? A new customer
Well,
comes
these
to
are,
us and says.
well, new customers, but these are that's I'm focusing on existing customers. That says, we're doing great, you know, China's
I think that
going away.
I think we'd be cautious about that. I think we would be cautious, and we do the same thing for customers who want to go to the FS class. If their usage and their load factor is high enough, they might come to us and say, "Hey, I want to go FS." But I think we would be cautious about somebody going, "Trust me on this. I'm gonna be wrong." I think we'd have to probably take that on a case-by-case basis. But if you're showing me that construction has started and you've got the new equipment in, then that might be a different case.
Or maybe you work a take or pay arrangement with them that they pay for 35,000 decatherms.
Um,
See how much they use.
Yeah.
But that would be a billing take or pay.
Right, right.
You have to bill that.
Right.
Questions 7 and 8, I think we kind of covered. These were just about growth, about in the TS class and where that growth came from. I'm not going to dwell on those. They were just based on flat growth. Number 9, the basis for the 60/40 allocation instead of 67/33 as settled in the 2013 general rate case. I lifted a quote off the settlement stipulation and put it on the slide, but it was just basically that was a settled amount. It wasn't precedent setting. I get fight over it again.
There was a combination of things
that happened to
in that rate case, and this was only one element that led to a settlement. I'll put parties on the notice. If we come forward with the same package, the division will not agree to that settlement again.
Okay. The 67/33 or the whole package?
No, if it's the same package, say 67/33 is one element, and let's say there were 4 other elements that went along with that, and we're saying hindsight is 20/20. We would not agree to the same 5-element package again.
I think we're probably with you.
I guess our concern was we didn't see anything in the testimony, and maybe in prior cases that we're not as familiar with, but we didn't see anything that explained why 60/40 was the appropriate weighting.
And that's actually a really good question, and I don't really have a really great answer for you.
If you find anything, let us know, because we don't know either.
So let me give you some background though, because this is an every rate case issue, and so every time we file 60/40, because I know Kevin left, but he wants it to be closer to 70/30, and Artie wants it to be closer to 50/50, and so I haven't seen any solid mathematical reason to do either one of those yet, and so I go with 60/40, and that's what we put in the case, and then we'll hash it out. But I know that's not the best answer, and as an accountant that loves numbers and the reasons for doing things, it kills me a little bit. But that's why it's done that way.
But I think the point here is if you went to say a 70/30, then the under collection in the TS class would be less.
Yep, that is correct. That is correct. I believe
the current under collection.
That is all of my slides. That's right.
Yeah.
Any other?
Can I just clarify one thing? When you talk about percentage under collection, you say percent of cost of service. As I went through the exhibits, it seems that what you're really referring to is the percent of the system average rate of return, not the total cost of serving a class. Is that correct?
I'd have to look at the formulas that are in it, see what it's doing.
I think it's the total cost of service we're assigning to that class, but you might be looking at, I think part of that analysis is showing a return, an overall return that class is providing. And maybe that's where it's not clear.
It appears that that's where the percentage came from, and it's not the same percentage that it would be if you're looking at the total cost of serving the class.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah,
Okay.
we'd have to go look at that. Maybe Kelly can walk me through that. Yeah. So that's all I have. Like I say, there's some pretty big data requests coming out in the next couple of days and weeks. So if we can be of any help, let us know.
Well, I thank you for letting me chime in as much as I have.
No, I appreciate it. It's helpful to.
Please from the phone.
I think that's Howard's. Was that Howard? It's Damon.
Is that Damon?
Oh.
Sorry, Damon, were you trying to say something?
Yeah, I'm trying to request a copy of the slide.
Oh, yeah, they are on the commission's website right now. Do you know how to get to that?
I know how to get to the commission's website. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, they're posted there.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for your time. I'm done.
Thanks, Austin. What?